So hi guys, a very good evening to you. So we are back on another webinar hosted by 99x. So in this webinar, we're going to be introducing you to Prisma, which is a new kind of a database access tool. And with this, throughout the end of this, we are going to be seeing how exactly it's going to be helping you to simplify your database access. So I'm Pastor Gunadilaka, currently working as a software engineer at 99x. My current engagements are mostly in mobile development, but I'm much passionate about full stack development, so which led me to be part of the Prisma Ambassador team. So without further ado, let's go through the agenda. So starting off with, we're going to be introducing you to different database access tools that are existing in the Node.js ecosystem. Then we're going to be seeing some of the, we're going to take a discussion on some of the common issues that are existing with these traditional ORMs. And then we're going to be jumping into what exactly is Prisma and the databases that Prisma support and how it tackles the previously mentioned issues that are existing in the traditional ORMs and how exactly Prisma is going to be fitting into your tech stack. Then we'll be dissecting the parts of Prisma, and we're going to be seeing how they can become effectively efficient for you. Then on the final part, we'll be moving on to a hands-on session. We'll be identifying some of the workflows that are existing with Prisma. Then we are going to be identifying what exactly Prisma Schema is, which is the core component, the core unit of control. Then we're going to write some queries with Prisma Client, and we're going to be seeing how easy it is to perform the database transactions and stuff like that. Then finally, we're going to be seeing Prisma Studio in action, which is going to be helping you a lot to visualize your data. So as an introduction, when you're working with the server-side development, one of the primitive questions that are coming into your mind is, how can I access or modify data in a database? So there are plenty of methods lying around. So if we try to categorize these methods, and also if we, also in this session, we're going to be mainly focusing on relational databases, while some NoSQL databases will also be concerned by minuscule. So one method of database access is to write plain SQL queries. So to achieve this, there are plenty of packages lying in Node.js. So one being MySQL or MySQL 2. And to work with PostgreJS, there's Postgre. To work with Postgre, there's PostgreJS. And apart from these, if you take cloud vendors like AWS, they provide SDKs, like AWS SDK provide simple APIs to write string queries to interact with databases like RDS. So on the right-hand side, you can see MySQL package in action. So you have to create a connection first. Then after, so within this create connection, you can manage some things like number of pool connections and things like that. Then you make the query using a simple string. So the downside, so the pros and cons, if we consider, the pro is that you have total control, you have total dominion over what you need to gain out of the database. You can write fully effective, fully efficient queries, and you can be in charge of that. But the downside is that it's not much productive. That in the sense, you don't have much idea about, there's no IntelliSense or IDE friendly when it comes to writing the queries. And you will be writing repetitive boilerplates of codes, and it's not much maintainable. If there is some things like database schema change at one point, you'll have to be changing this in so much of places in the code base. So because of that, it's not much productive, but it has high control. And adding an abstraction layer on top of this, we get query builders. One of the query builders that are existing in Node.js ecosystem is Next.js. So how you work with Next.js, for example, is that there exist some flexible APIs that abstracts all the underlying SQL query statements like creating table or select statements and things like that. So because of that, because since there's one abstract layer on top of this, there is still a higher level of control and also a little amount of and also a little amount of productivity. That in the sense you have ID friendly code. So for example, Next.js provides some types for TypeScript. So because of that, you can auto completion and things like that are existing. But still, again, the same problem occurs. So if you are if you are evolving your database schema rapidly, then you need to make alterations to multiple places. And also still, you have to manage your connection pooling and stuff like that will be there as well. Then adding so much of abstraction layers on top of this, you can obtain things like things like ORMs or ODMs. ORM being sense object relational mappers, and ODMs object document mappers. ORMs are used in relational databases, and ODMs are usually normally used in NoSQL databases. So some of the examples for ORMs are Sequelize, Type ORM, then Micro ORM, and for ODMs you get Mongoose. So the main concept is that your entities are mapped into classes, and they are ultimately getting converted back into the underlying database representation, which is normally tables in relational databases. So on the right hand side, there is an example in here written using Sequelize. So on the bottom side, you can see on the right bottom side, you create a user using the user model, which is a class representation of the user entity or the user table. Then you create using the provided create API. So there are some common issues that are existing with the traditional ORMs. So for the sake of simplicity, we are giving the term traditional ORMs in here for these existing ORMs in the Node.js ecosphere. And on the other hand, Prisma can be termed as a next generation ORM, which you'll be seeing by the end of this session why it's worth to call it like that. So if we take traditional ORMs, when you're working with relational databases and traditional ORMs, the tables are mapped into model classes. So those two are two different representation, because you can't exactly represent something that's entitled to like object-oriented representation to a relational representation. So one issue that's come in is object relational impedance mismatch. So on the right hand side, you can see the type ORM in action. So this is a class representation of the user table. So type ORM provides these generators like entity, primary, generated column, and stuff like that. So you can resort to those and create your underlying tables appropriately. Like primary generated column is a representation of primary keys, and there's one-to-one for representing the relationship between two tables and then one-to-one mapping, which we'll be seeing in the hands-on session, because we'll be moving into a kind of comparison between type ORM and Prisma. And another issue is a synchronization issue. Synchronization being the sense like how you will be, when you are evolving your database schema over the time, how you will need to manage this. So for this, usually ORMs come with tools like migration tools. So so when you are writing migrations, usually there's up and down functions. So up is used to create your tables or make rapid changes to the tables, like alter column, alter table, or something like that. And down is invoked when reverting those changes. but still the synchronization issues happen, like when you are if by some coincidence you are changing the database schema manually, then what's going to happen is that you will no longer be in control of like making the changes directly from the code base. So because of that, you will have to either make alterations to the classes that you are making, and then go through those changes and make the migrations manually, and some complications are occurring. And the complexity, because so the reason why it's much more complex is that there's so much of API data surface that needs to be covered, because it's wrapping so much of abstraction layers. So because of that, there's a higher level of API surface that you need to cover. So most of the time, if, for example, when working with either type ORM or Sequelize, what's going to happen is that you will spend so much time working around the documentation of these ORMs. So not to like discourage or anything, but that's the reality. So when you are thinking where exactly does Prisma stand among these traditional ORMs and all these query builders and writing plain SQL and everything, you need to be considering two axes mainly. One is the productivity, like I previously mentioned, and the other one is control. So if you take ORMs, SQL query builders, and plain SQLs, so they lie in this like this. So ORMs have so much of productivity, and plain SQL, they have so much of control but less productivity due to the nature of writing things in stringified manner. And SQL query builders, they have a little amount of productivity, but and also a higher level of control because they're working with low-level APIs. And Prisma is lying on a healthy constraint like this. So Prisma has a high level of productivity and a certain level of control as well, which you'll be seeing by the when we move into the hands-on session. So what exactly is Prisma? So Prisma can be termed simply like this. Prisma is an open source next generation ORM that allows you to easily manage and interact with your database exactly. And also Prisma can be termed as a complete type-safe database access tool as well. So the databases that Prisma support, if you take relational databases, Prisma supports Postgre, MySQL, variants like MariaDB is also supported, SQLite, and Microsoft SQL Server. Apart from these relational databases, Prisma also support NoSQL databases like MongoDB, which is currently still in early access or preview. And then yesterday, they released version 3.9.0, which also support CockroachDB, which is currently in preview as well. So apart from these databases, Prisma also support relational databases that cloud vendors provide. For example, there's AWS Aurora and Aurora Serverless. Aurora Serverless in the sense it doesn't still support the data API that's exposed. And also for Azure SQL, it's still compatible. So how exactly will Prisma fit into the tech stack? So in a traditional client-server architecture, Prisma will exist in the server as a library that will help you to access the database. Okay, so we were at a point where we were discussing about where exactly Prisma is going to be fit into the tech stack. So Prisma is obviously a server-side library that's going to be helping you access your database. But if designed perfectly, if you maintain the correct design decisions, Prisma can be used in order to maintain fully type safety throughout your client to the database access levels. So we are going to be talking about the main parts of Prisma. So Prisma can be divided into three major components. One is Prisma Client. Prisma Client is an auto-generated and type-safe query builder. And then Prisma Migrate is a database schema migration tool. So this is much like if you have worked with like Django. Django is providing it's providing a migration tool as well, so which is recognized as one of the top-notch migration tool. So and a Prisma Migrate is also having a reverse part. That means in the sense like you can actually introspect the database and you can convert the underlying models, the entities, the database entities into your Prisma schema. So that's something that's not available on either on the other ORMs that are out there, like micro ORM, and I haven't seen this in action. Like micro ORM and type ORM, they don't have this kind of capability, which is kind of nifty, and which is kind of like it's much more developer friendly as well, which we'll be seeing by the end of the session when we are doing the hands-on session. And Prisma Studio finally is a visual editor for the data in your database. It's going to help you visualize all your data, and it's going to be helping you to perform CRUD operations as well. Okay, with that, we're going to be moving on to a hands-on session. So if you have any questions by so far, you can drop it on the YouTube chat as well, or you can drop it over here. And we'll be moving to those in the Q&A session. Okay, so the prerequisites that we are going to be needing for this hands-on session are MySQL database. So you can spin up a MySQL database using something like Docker, or you can connect to a remote server as well, or you can resort to any other option that are available. And Node.js, and also code editor like VS Code is, I'm recommending VS Code for this because there is an extension called Prisma when you are working with the Prisma schema. That's going to be helpful to autotype and for the IntelliSense. And from knowledge side, you will be needing some basic concepts with relational databases, and some understanding about TypeScript will be an added advantage. So we are going to be working on a side-by-side comparison of two simple Node.js script. One is built with TypeORM and the other one with Prisma. And this project is entirely built using TypeScript because we need type-safe database access. And again, this is not a disclaimer. As a disclaimer, this is not an attempt to say that Prisma is much better than TypeORM or any other ORMs existing out there. And this will be the ERD or the schema that we'll be building. So it's a simple like a blogging post kind of scenario where you'll be having user profile post entities, and user to profile is one-to-one mapping, and then profile to post is a one-to-many mapping. So again, no business concerns are there. So all the business logic, you can just ignore this, and we're going to be simply considering about how you are going to persist the data on each of these entities separately. Okay, so in order to install Prisma, first you have to do is you have to install Prisma as a dev-dependency, which we can then use by invoking Prisma as using npx. So to do that, after installing this as a dev-dependency, you can initialize Prisma using npx prisma init. Then this will cause new files to be generated. So I have already gone ahead and done this. So this repository that we are going to be seeing will be, will be visible on on this repository, which will be linked in the webinar description after a short while. So let's just go ahead to the code structure. So we have two subdirectories here. One is Prisma starter and the TypeORM starter, and also there's a plain SQL file as well. Like I said, I've already gone ahead and created, so I've initialized the Prisma in the project. So this generates a schema.prisma file first, so which is having this generator and data source. And also, like I have previously told, you're going to be needing an extension called Prisma. For this, let me check on the enabled ones. So this extension is very much helpful when you are working with .prisma file extensions, because it's going to be helping you to auto-complete the tags over here, like this. Okay, so with that, we're going to be moving back into the presentation. So the workflows that are existing with Prisma, there are two main workflows that if we look carefully. So one workflow is that you can adopt Prisma to a fresh project. That's a greenfield application. That means how you're working in a greenfield application is that when incorporating Prisma is that you update your Prisma schema with the desired data model. That means you update your .prisma file, schema.prisma file with the data model that you need, depending on the business domain. And you run migrations in order to generate the underlying database entities. So for this, you can invoke npx Prisma migrate. And then for every incremental change in the DB schema needed, you have to update the data model continuously in Prisma schema and run migrations again. Then afterwards, you have to resort to a command called npx Prisma generate in order to generate the Prisma client, which will be used to perform CRUD operations. Then another workflow is that you can adopt Prisma to an existing database or an existing project. So this is a brownfield application. So what you can do is you can introspect the database and update your Prisma schema first. If you have existing data, that's okay. That's completely okay. But first you'll be working on a dev environment in order to do something called baselining your database. So in order to introspect, what you have to do is invoke this command npx Prisma db pull. Then you generate the Prisma client using npx Prisma generate, like I previously told. Then this will generate the Prisma client, which will be used to perform the CRUD operations. So we are going to be working on a similar case like brownfield application, where you'll be having an existing database. So let's do an introspection first. So that's why we came up with this .sql file. So if we take a look at this, this is having those three entities that I represented you earlier. And this is already generated on a database that I'm having. So let me show that first. So I have this database simple blog over here, and this is having all these three entities. And in order to connect to this database, what you have to do is, like when you are initializing Prisma, it also generates, apart from the schema.prisma, this is connecting to the database URL that you have specified in a .env file. So that env file is generated over here, like on the .env. So this is auto-generated when you're initializing initializing Prisma. So I have gone ahead and simplified this like this. So I have already added, so you can even configure your connection pool as well over here. So I'll be pointing to that simple block that I have already shown. So let's do an introspection first. So let me just minify this. Okay, so to do that, Prisma db pull. Okay, so that's going to be generating the model like this. So you have, this is the data model definitions over here. So this is the representation of the database entities, the tables, which we'll be covering when we are looking at the Prisma schema. Okay, so let's move back to the session. So Prisma Schema. So Prisma Schema is the main configuration file in your Prisma setup. So it's consisting of three main parts. One is the data source. So data source is over here, the data source block. So the generators, the second one. And finally, the rest below is the data model definitions. So if we take data sources, our data sources define how Prisma connects to the databases. So right now at the moment, Prisma can only specify one data source block. But previously, like current version is Prisma 3. So it's Prisma 2 actually. But back in Prisma 1, there was also a possibility to connect multiple data sources, which had like different, which is completely different from what Prisma is having right now. So the available fields that are inside the data source block are provider, URL, and shadow database URL. Provider is the database dialect that you're using. So the other database dialects that are available. So if we go over here, let me just check. So CockroachDB is now in preview. The MongoDB, MySQL, PostgreSQL, SQLite, and SQL servers. So all these supported databases are over here. So that's needed to be specified through here. And to the URL, you have to provide the database URL that you need to access. And the shadow database is another concept. When you're performing migrations, usually in the development environment, like when you're performing things like npx Prisma migrate, which I showed you earlier in a greenfield application. When doing that, you need to do things like to check whether your running migration is having some effect on the current database schema that is existing in the database. So to do that, Prisma spawns up another database called shadow database and checks if there are any mismatches. So if there are mismatches, this process is called checking the schema drift. So in order to do that and run migrations accordingly, a shadow database is needed. So this URL is specified directly for this, but this is an optional field when you're working in like in the current setup that I'm having, because the database that I'm having is already providing capabilities to spawn up a new database. But if you're working with cloud vendors like AWS, sometimes it may not be possible to do this. So to do that, you need to somehow manually create a database separated, dedicated to this shadow database and provide the URL in here. So that's why it's provided. Then if we take the other data block, if we take the other block in the Prisma schema, the generators. The generators are the assets that are going to be created when you are running the npx Prisma generate command. So the available fields that are inside this block are provider, output, binary targets, and the engine type. So the provider is specifying what you need to be generated. So in here we have specified Prisma client JS. So if you are capable of developing other packages that are completely compatible with the generator spec in Prisma, you can provide in here as well. For example, there are community generators out there. Like for example, one famous one that I admire is the Nexus Prisma, which is compatible with GraphQL Nexus, which is the official Prisma plugin for GraphQL Nexus, still in early preview, is used primarily to develop code first GraphQL schemas, which is highly beneficial in case if you need the entire type safety from client to the server. So the output directory, so the output is used to a point where exactly you need to generate these assets. And the binary targets, that's actually if you need to point this to like to a whole like on the binary level, then this will be utilized. Then the engine type. So for example, if I'm working on a Windows machine and I need to specify okay, I need these assets created based on the OS specific, So you can specify this over here. For example, if you are working with macOS, you can specify Darwin, if I recall this correctly, as the engine type, and the assets will be created fully compatible to that. Then the data model definitions. This is the important part in your in writing your business domain. So the model block, as we have seen over here, is responsible for generating an entity in your application domain. So they get mapped into either tables, or either if it is relational databases, it's tables. If it is NoSQL databases, it's going to be documents. So there are fields nested inside these model blocks. So these can be categorized into two main types. One is scalar field, the other one is relational fields. So scalar fields are general data types that are used in our model, like the primitive stuff like integer, string, or things like that. So these get mapped into underlying database entities. And furthermore, you can specify, if we take like when you're working with MySQL, you can specify like varchar, but with lens as well. So in order to specify this, there's like another what do you call this, like a decorator there out there, like called at db. It can be specified like db.varchar. You can specify how it's going to be mapped into the underlying database entity, which I will show you in a while. And the other kind of field is the relational field. So this is used to represent the mappings between the entities in the underlying database tables. But the thing is, like, it's not going to get mapped into, although this is like a virtual representation, it's not going to get mapped in the underlying tables. Okay, with that, we're going to be writing queries with Prisma client. So in order to do this, first you have to install the Prisma client as the dependency, because when you're writing Prisma, when you're doing the command Prisma generate, although it generates a Prisma client, you have to ensure that it's existing in the dependency list. So that's why you need this step. And then you have to instantiate the Prisma client in your code, because on the other hand, like if the Prisma client generated output directory is different, then your IDE won't pick that up. So that's why you need the Prisma client installed as well. So then you have to initialize the Prisma client in your code, similar to this. Then you can start writing your queries. Right. So first we'll be looking at the schema first. Then we'll be moving into a little comparison between the type ORM code that is existing in this repository, and side by side we'll be writing the queries. So in here, so like I have previously mentioned, for example, in the user entity, so the first name is having a length of, so the first name and the last name, they need to have a varchar length of 30. So in order to do this, this is like a decorate, if I recall this term correctly, at db is used, and then dot varchar 30 can be specified, and then so if you can recall the .sql schema that we wrote earlier, so it had different indexes. So let me show that again. So it had different indexes created, so like profile, username, IDX. So all of these get mapped when we were doing the introspection. So it's the exact replica of this. It's the exact replica of this table representation, but it's written with .prisma Prisma schema language. So there's no any class representation here. So that is going to mitigate the issue of object relational impedance mismatch to a certain level. Okay, so we'll move on to writing queries. So for this, let me take the, so in the Prisma starter, there is a app.ts file. And let me take the type ORM project file. Okay, so when you're working with type ORM, you have to first initialize the connection here. Then you have to, so this is actually creating the user, followed up by the profile creation. Then the posts are getting created, and those are mapped into the profiles. So sorry, yes, the post author is mapped into the profile that was created. So that's going to happen in this transaction block. So we are going to mimic this exact same thing using Prisma. So let me first generate the Prisma client. Prisma generate. So apart from these steps, when you're working with the brownfield application, there's another step called baselining the project. That means that in the sense, like, I don't have any migrations that are residing within the database. So that's going to lead some issues when I'm trying to evolve my application after introspecting. So because of this, there's an additional step called baselining. So that needs to be performed, but I'm not going to go ahead because we are only working on the development environment. But if you are trying to push this into production, you're going to be needing that. That's going to take some time to explain. Because of this, we'll be skipping this. Okay, so the Prisma client was generated, and let's initialize the Prisma client. So I have commented this one over here, and we are going to be writing our queries over here. All right, so in order to use this, so we'll use awaits Prisma dot. So as you can see, all of these types are auto-generated. All of these APIs are auto. There's like type completion, and there's IDE support for what it will do and what it will perform. So it's all documented over here. So it's much more developer friendly. So let me just do the exact this transaction unit of work over here. With something called nested writing. So you can perform this without writing separate transactions, but it can be simplified like this. So let me show you that one. So Prisma.user, if we take this one, so Prisma user exposes CRUD operations for the user model. Some examples are like this. Okay, so if I dot, so it has functions nested in it. So let's see. So we need to create a new user. Okay, so create arguments are within a JSON object. So let's see. Okay, we have data block. So the data that needs to be inserted to when creating a user. Okay, so we go ahead. Okay, so this is the exact model representation that we had. So first name, last name, and the email. So I'm going to be copying this one from here. Okay, so let me do a little linting. Yes, lint fix. Okay, so after that, we're going to need to create the profile. So which can be done if we control space. Okay, we have profile. So if we check the type, Prisma.profile is having profile unchecked, create nested with one user input. Okay, let's do that. So if we take the IDE support by pressing Control or Command space. So these three blocks are there. So since there's a 1-to-1 mapping, so it's going to be prompted with this, either connect or create. So connect means if there is an existing profile creator, you can link over here. Connect or create means you can either, if you're not certain about whether profile data is created, you can perform an operation using this. Then create is to create a new profile entity and map it with the user. So that's what we need to do. So create. Okay, so it's having username block and also post. So username, we're going to be copying this one, Dan Brown. And then I need to create the post as well. So it's much more declarative, as you can see. So a post will be having, since it's a one-to-many representation between profile and post, so there's 4 blocks under this. One is connect, connect or create, create, and this create many. So we need to create multiple posts. So we're going to be using create many. So if we go under this, then we check this. So there's data and there's skip duplicates. So data is used to publish what you need to write to the database, and then skip duplicates means if you are having if you need to eliminate duplicate data, this if there is like a unique indexes that were let's say if the title is having a unique index, then you can use skip duplicates to avoid any failovers. Okay, data. So let me just, so this is, if we check the type again, so this is an enumerable type. So it's definitely an array of objects. So this is going to be an array. So let me just copy this type. So there shouldn't be any warnings here. Okay, so there's no warnings. Okay, so that's that. And then let's hover over to the result. So right now it's showing me that this is going to be returning only the user. But if I need the nested data as well, if I, let's say I need the profile created as well as the post that I need as well. So I can include the data include the nodes or the data that I that can be nested through this. So to do that, there's include. So let me include profile, and I can also include under this. So let me scroll this down a bit. Post as well. So it's true. So this is showing me post to be a Boolean. So I need it's true. So let me check the type again. So now it's going to be returning the profile as well as the nested, as well as the associated post as well. So let's just execute this one. So I have written already a so let me see what's the command that I need to invoke. So it's a serve. So it's going to be building and executing the this file. This is going to transpile into JavaScript code, and it's going to invoke that. So let's just npm run serve. So I have already added a debug query over here. So let's see what happens. So it should return the it should console log the user profile and post. Okay. So just like that, it's much more declarative, and it's much more the API is much more human friendly. So you can see the difference, and so there's no need to manage separate transactions. And you might be wondering how it's going to be, so why it didn't need it to manage the connections first. So how Prisma is different in here is that when you're making the first query, Prisma is going to lazily connect with the database. Rather than you can actually invoke like create connection, but it's not going to be needed, like because the lazy connection is much more appropriate. And also apart from this, if you need to write transactions, like let's say you're performing an API call, rather than this, there is also the transaction API. So you can resort to that as well. But in this example, you can see that it's much more developer friendly, and it's much more directive. Okay, so back to the presentation. So we'll be seeing the Prisma Studio that's used to visualize your data. So this can be spawned using this command npx Prisma Studio. So let me just start the Prisma Studio. npx Prisma Studio. Right. Okay, so we are live on file. So let's go over there. Okay, so it's auto opening. So in here, so this is much like the PHP admin like I've already have in the other tab. So if I go over here, and if I need to perform any CRUD operations, let's say that I need to change this value, so you can perform it like this, and it's basically to visualize your data. .lk. I need to perform these save changes. So it's much like that. So it's easier to visualize and alter your data. So with that, guys, we're going to be moving into the Q&A session. So the questions are open. Okay, it seems that we don't have any questions. So with that, so if you are using Prisma, I believe this will be your reaction rather than writing SQL queries. It's going to be much more developer friendly. So I hope that, so I suppose this will be your reactions as well. And you can connect with Prisma through any media that's out there, like social media or Stack Overflow or even Slack as well. So the official site is prisma.io, and to reach on Slack, you can reach us. You can reach Prisma at slack.prisma.io, and for the GitHub repository, you can reach github.com/prisma. So with that, we're going to wrap up the session. For any technical update in the future, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel in 99x. You can hit the bell button right over there to receive updates. So hope you'll be having a wonderful time. So thank you.